each of them. If you want more information, here are the different books that my wife Gigi and I have written, and the one I focused on today was iBrain. Thank you very much for your attention. Any questions?
Yes. What have you found in terms of the difference between people's brain deterioration once they leave the workforce versus, like, have you found this dementia to be more on the onset of retirement when they don't have that many things engaged in on a daily basis, or have you found it across all platforms, working versus not working?
So what is the effect of leaving the workforce on brain aging or onset of dementia? To my knowledge, retirement is not a specific risk factor for developing dementia. Now, depression may be, late life depression may be, and there may be a higher rate of depression in people who retire. The studies generally find that people who retire, who plan their retirement, and who have enough financial success so they're comfortable and have physical health, they generally do pretty well when they retire. The biggest risk factors for dementia are actually age is the greatest risk factor, and probably there's some risk in terms of family history, but there are other ones. If we have time, we can go into them in more detail. Yeah.
Do you do any studies on the cognitive barriers to using technology? People just saying, I can't because I'm too old or from a different generation or whatever.
So studies about cognitive barrier to using technology, we haven't studied that systematically. But what we've found in our own experience is that unless you can bring the technology to the person, they're not going to use it. Unless it somehow clicks and it's meaningful to them. And let me give you an example from my own life. My mother started doing a little bit of email, but she doesn't really do, I think she still has a dial-up or something like that. She doesn't really get it, but she tinkers with it. My father never used technology at all, and until a few years ago, he was still practicing as a physician at one of the county hospitals. Most technology was turning on the television or the radio. But when they said, okay, we're going digital with our medical records at work, he was on the computer after a week. So I think if it's something that seems to be important and meaningful, regardless of the age, people will click into the technology. Another example, I mentioned electronic books. Older people seem to like it. Why do they like it? They can increase the font size, so it's good for your fading visual acuity. And also, if you're a lot of older people who are retired travel a lot, they can bring a gazillion books and they don't have to hurt their backs by carrying all of them. Yeah.
What's the current thinking about cognitive reserve as a potential for staving off the effects of aging and dementia?
So cognitive reserve to stave off the effects of aging or dementia. That's certainly, we see that people who have more education, who are smarter, it's harder to diagnose dementia in them because they're compensating more. And in fact, we've done other studies where we find that people with the genetic risk, if you give them a memory task, their brains work harder to naturally compensate. So there is something about cognitive reserve that helps. The issue is, can doing lots of brain exercises, can that really develop cognitive reserve, or is it something that we're genetically predisposed toward? I think we haven't answered that question completely, and despite that, most experts would say, yes, keep your mind active, do engage your mind, and you want to train but not strain your brain. Find the sweet spot for you where the exercises or the games are fun and interesting. Yeah?
Like the technology, like the brain fitness and the things that you can get on the Nintendo DS that sort of help stimulate brain memory and stuff, compare in a diagnosed case of Alzheimer's with like an ARISAT in terms of forestalling the system.
So the question is, how would something like these brain games that are electronic, how would they affect someone with dementia versus taking a medicine, or in terms of someone who already has dementia? I don't think anyone's done that study, so we don't know the answer. My guess is that most of these devices are not developed for people who already have dementia. They're for the what we call the worried well, baby boomers who have memory challenges, and to help them there. So my guess is it probably wouldn't help that much. There have been some studies, though, in that group of people who are at risk. And I think that Jerry Savage at Stanford looked at this a number of years ago, and what he found that there was a certain point where someone did better if they had memory training. So not just brain gain, specific cognitive training plus the Aricept. And it makes sense because you think if you're in a certain place and the Aricept will boost your cognition, it'll boost it just enough so you can understand how to use the memory training. So there's probably a place where there might be an interaction between mental exercise and pharmacologic intervention. Yeah.
So building on that, you mentioned a couple of companies, given this is a consumer electronics show. So which of the products actually live up to the claims?
So I can't answer that because I haven't systematically assessed that. I know there are some groups that are beginning to ask those questions. Unfortunately, it costs a lot of money to study these things. And this is a question that comes up I've seen over the years with the pharmaceutical industry. They always want comparator studies, and usually there aren't comparator studies because, in any company, you don't want to ask a question if you don't want to see an answer that may not be in your favor. So it's very hard to answer that. So the answers to those questions would probably come from funding from non-commercial entities, the National Science Foundation or NIH. Thank you very much for your attention.